In this video lesson, we'll discuss the issue of expansion of slavery into the territories, the different senators that argued the different points in Congress, and the eventual compromise of 1850. The top senators of the 1850s are shown on this slide. These three senators represented the sectionalism that gripped the United States during this time period, and all of these men were involved in the Senate for over 30 years. John C. Calhoun, who we've talked about previously, pictured here, was Andrew Jackson's vice president who resigned to go back to South Carolina and become the voice of the South. He was also a slaveholder who wanted slavery to expand. We have Henry Clay from Kentucky, so he is from the West, pictured here, and he is known as the Great Compromiser for his efforts to save the Union. He authored the Missouri Compromise of 1820, the Compromise of 1833, which ended the nullification crisis with South Carolina, and also the Compromise of 1850 that we'll discuss in this video. Daniel Webster from Massachusetts spoke for the North and opposed the expansion of slavery into the territories, but is going to support the Compromise of 1850 as a way to try to reduce tensions between the North and the South. And Daniel Webster can be seen here in this picture. The differences between the North and South are becoming more and more increasingly troublesome. The North was becoming more reliant upon industry, and a good representation of what it was like in the North is in this picture here. Railroads and communication systems linked regions together. Manufacturing was what the economy was based on in the North. Immigrants provided the needed labor, and they were wage earners, so they were paid for their work. And large cities are going to emerge all along these transportation crossroads because people are going to live close to transportation where they can go to and from work, or they want to be near their work. The South is going to rely on cotton as their primary cash crop and remain primarily agricultural. They're going to use slave labor, not wage labor, as is used in the North with immigrants. And they felt that slavery was best for both the owner and the slave. And a picture of slaves working on a plantation is represented here. So this could represent the North, and this could represent the South as their economies developed. President Zachary Taylor was the president who succeeded James Polk as president in 1849. He will push for immediate admission of California and New Mexico into the United States, entering as free states, which is going to enrage the South. The South, again, is going to speak about seceding from the Union and leaving the United States completely. And a bill called the Wilmot Proviso is going to be presented to Congress, which is going to further anger the South. As of the Missouri Compromise in 1820, slavery had been outlawed in any new states north of what's called the 3630 parallel. On this map, right now, I'm drawing a line right above the 3630 parallel, which was the Missouri Compromise line. Anything south of the Missouri Compromise line was open to slavery. Anything north of the Missouri Compromise line was closed to slavery, except for Missouri, which had been admitted as a slave state under the Compromise. Most of the new territory was north of the line, assuring the North that they would only have a few new slave states to deal with. But the new land that was gained from Mexico meant that additional land was going to be open to slavery, because all of this land gained from Mexico is going to eventually be settled by U.S. settlers and apply for admission into the Union. David Wilmot of Pennsylvania opposed the expansion of slavery onto the new land gained from Mexico, and he's pictured here in this picture. He proposed a bill called the Wilmot Proviso, which would forbid slavery in all the new territories gained from Mexico. So if this bill had passed, California, the Utah Territory, and New Mexico would be closed to slavery forever. Of course, Southerners opposed the proviso because they wanted the opportunity to add new slave states into the Union. But Northerners supported it because they wanted to limit the expansion of slavery into the territories. The bill will fail, but it also is going to show the regional differences in Congress and the heightened tensions that continue to grow between the North and the South. Sectional differences are going to continue to cause tension between the North and South. Congress was already divided over the South's refusal to vote for additional internal improvements in the North. Additional slave or free states would have tipped the balance of power in Congress, and the slave states and in the South and the free states in the North were very, very conscious of maintaining that balance. But it was inevitable that the South would eventually lose power in the Senate because the majority of the land that was open for expansion in the United States was above the 3630 parallel set by the Missouri Compromise. Alexander Stephens, who's the future vice president of the Confederate States of America, made a comment that the North was going to stick the Wilmot Amendment to every appropriation, and then all South will vote against any measures, thus clogging the Senate. And I tell you, the prospect ahead is dark, cloudy, thick, and gloomy. So he knew that this was not going to be an issue that was going to be settled easily. California is going to apply for statehood into the United States. And they're going to apply for statehood in 1849, immediately after the beginning of the gold rush, because the population had grown so quickly. Their new constitution forbade slavery, which shocked people in the South because they assumed that since most of California lay below the Missouri Compromise line, that the state would be open to slavery, and it's not going to be open to slavery. President Zachary Taylor is going to support California as a newly admitted free state into the United States. The issue of slavery and slave territory is going to escalate when California asks to enter the Union as a free state, and Texas takes some of the New Mexico territory as slave territory. Leaders in the Senate begin talking about allowing the states to decide about the issue of slavery. This would be called popular sovereignty, which would allow voters in a territory to be able to vote for or against slavery in their state. So basically, the people who resided there would vote to decide whether the state would be slave or free. Southerners, though, saw this as a way to limit slavery, and they began again to renew their discussions about seceding from the Union and leaving the United States. The Compromise of 1850 begins to be authored by Henry Clay, who is seen here in this picture. And he tried to shape a compromise that the North and South could both accept. And Henry Clay's plan was called the Compromise of 1850. And it included some points that were meant to make the South and the North happy by giving them each something that they wanted. California was to enter the Union as a free state. Texas was to receive $10 million to surrender its claim to the New Mexico land it had claimed, and Utah got popular sovereignty, which means the voters in Utah would vote to decide whether the territory would be slave or free. In Washington, D.C., the slave trade was ended forever. And to make the South happy, the South received a stronger fugitive slave law, which we're going to discuss more in class because it's going to have a large impact on runaway slaves and basically escaping into the North to gain their freedom. John C. Calhoun and Daniel Webster are both going to respond. Now remember, John C. Calhoun is the voice of the South, and Daniel Webster was mostly speaking for the North. This is going to be the last senatorial debate between these three men that have been in the Senate for so long regarding the issue of slavery. Henry Clay, remember, the great compromiser who wrote the Compromise of 1850 as well as the Missouri Compromise, represents Kentucky. He is from the West. Daniel Webster from Massachusetts is going to argue for the Compromise of 1850 for passage to be able to save the Union. And John C. Calhoun, who represents South Carolina and is the voice of the South, argued against the compromise and insisted on Southern equal rights in the new territories. It looked like the Compromise of 1850 was going to fail until President Taylor suddenly dies in office. And he had opposed Henry Clay's plan and opposed the Compromise of 1850. As the new president is sworn in, whose name is Millard Fillmore supports the Compromise of 1850, and it was able to be passed after each vote, each part of it was actually pulled apart and voted on separately. But is the Compromise of 1850 the final solution when it comes to the discussion between slavery expanding into the territories? Basically, you can see here on the map, this is the results of the Compromise of 1850. You have free states or territories shown by the light pinkish or purplish shaded areas. You have the lime green areas in the South representing slave states or territories. And then you have the orange territories that you can see, or parts of the United States, not including Mexico down here, that were open to slavery by the principle of popular sovereignty. So the next areas that there'll be a focus on for settlement in the United States are these two territories which now have received popular sovereignty. And the voters will get to decide, they will vote at the polls and decide whether the territory will be admitted as a free state or a slave state. And we'll talk more about the impact on that increasing tensions between the North and South in class.